The great chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from across the stars. Thousands of delegates sat in floating seats that circled upward like a spiral of power and importance. At the very top sat the elder races, the ones who had traveled between stars when humanity was still learning to make fire. At the bottom, in the smallest and least comfortable seats, sat the human delegation. Ambassador Daniel Grant had grown used to this position. For 15 years, he had climbed the steps of this chamber to speak on behalf of Earth and her colonies. For 15 years, he had presented humanity's case with dignity and patience. And for 15 years, the answer had always been the same. Today would be different, though he did not yet know how different. The Valori High Speaker rose from her seat at the top of the chamber. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin that seemed to glow from within. Her species had ruled a quarter of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and they never let anyone forget it. The Council has reviewed the petition from the human Commonwealth, she announced, her voice carrying through the chamber without need for amplification. The request for permanent membership with full voting rights has been considered carefully. Daniel sat forward slightly. Around him, his small team of diplomats held their breath. They had worked for 3 years on this petition. They had gathered evidence of humanity's contributions, documented every jump gate built by human engineers, every plague stopped by human doctors, every war ended by human mediators. The Council finds that humanity, while useful in certain technical matters, has not yet demonstrated the cultural maturity required for full participation in galactic governance. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, but he kept his face still. He had learned long ago not to show emotion in this chamber. The other species saw human feelings as weakness, as proof that they were too primitive for the responsibilities of power. The petition is denied, the High Speaker continued. Humanity may resubmit in another 50 standard years. 50 years. Another lifetime of waiting. Another generation of humans building, serving, and dying for a galaxy that refused to acknowledge their worth. Daniel looked around the chamber. The Crix delegates were clicking their mandibles in what passed for laughter among their kind. The harmonics pulsed with colors that suggested amusement. Even the smaller species, the ones humanity had helped lift out of poverty and conflict, avoided meeting his eyes. Something changed in Daniel at that moment. It was not anger, though he had plenty of that. It was not sadness, though that was there too. It was something colder and clearer. It was the understanding that nothing would ever change as long as humanity kept playing by rules designed to keep them at the bottom. He stood up slowly. The chamber fell silent. Humans were expected to accept these decisions quietly and return to their work. They were not expected to speak. "High Speaker," Daniel said, his voice calm and steady. "I thank the Council for its consideration." The High Speaker nodded, already turning to the next item on the agenda. "However," Daniel continued, and the word hung in the air like a warning, "the human Commonwealth must respectfully decline to continue its participation in the Galactic Compact." Now the silence was absolute. 10,000 delegates stared at the small human standing in the lowest section of the chamber. Earth withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and obligations effective immediately. Our engineers, doctors, diplomats, and workers will be recalled from all posts throughout the galaxy. We wish the Council well in its future endeavors. Daniel picked up his briefcase and walked toward the exit. His team followed, their faces showing the same shocked determination. "You cannot do this," the High Speaker called out, and for the first time in anyone's memory, there was uncertainty in her voice. "The compact requires a 10-year notice period for withdrawal." Daniel stopped at the door and turned back. "The compact also requires that all member species be treated with basic respect and dignity. Since the Council has made it clear that these provisions do not apply to humanity, We see no reason why any provisions should apply to us." He left without another word. The news spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On space stations and colony worlds, on trading posts and military bases, humans received the same simple message from Earth: "Come home." Commander Laura Mitchell was overseeing repairs on a jump gate in the outer reach when her orders arrived. She read them twice, then looked out at the massive structure her team had spent 3 months rebuilding. "Pack everything up," she told her crew. "We leave in 6 hours." Her first officer, Kevin Torres, stared at her. "But the gate is not finished. If we leave now, this whole sector loses faster than light travel." "Not our problem anymore," Laura said. She felt a strange lightness as she said the words. For her entire career, she had carried the weight of galactic responsibility on her shoulders. Now that weight was gone. Let the Council figure it out. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out thousands of times. Human doctors left hospitals half-staffed. Human engineers abandoned power plants and water treatment facilities. Human diplomats walked out of negotiations that had taken decades to arrange. The other species watched with confusion and growing concern. Surely the humans would come back. Surely this was just a negotiating tactic, a tantrum that would pass. Humans were emotional creatures, everyone knew that. They would calm down and return to their proper place. But days turned into weeks, and the human ships kept leaving. They did not argue or explain. They simply packed their belongings, said polite goodbyes, and departed in silence. On Earth, Daniel Grant delivered his report to the United Human Worlds Assembly. President Nathan Cole listened carefully, then asked the question that was on everyone's mind. How long until they realize what they have lost? Daniel considered the question. He thought about the jump gates that humans had designed and built, using principles that no other species had ever mastered. He thought about the medical techniques that human researchers had developed, curing diseases that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. He thought about the countless small kindnesses, the everyday work that kept civilization running smoothly. 6 months, he said finally. Maybe a year. They've been taking us for granted for so long that they have forgotten what we actually do. Nathan nodded slowly. And when they come asking for help? Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then perhaps they will understand what respect really means. Outside the assembly hall, ships continued to arrive from every corner of the galaxy, carrying humans home. They came in silence, and in silence, they began to rebuild. Not for the galaxy that had rejected them, but for themselves. The Great Withdrawal had begun. 6 months passed, and the galaxy began to fall apart. It started with small things. A communication relay on the edge of Velori space stopped working. A water purification plant on a Crix colony world began producing contaminated water. A translation matrix at a busy trading station started making errors that turned simple greetings into deadly insults. At first, the other species tried to fix these problems themselves. How hard could it be? The humans had always made it look so easy. Surely any advanced civilization could maintain a simple jump gate or repair a basic power generator. They were wrong. High Counselor Virith of the Velori Empire stood in the control room of the largest jump gate in the galaxy. It connected the core worlds to the outer territories, carrying more traffic in a single day than most planets saw in a year. And it was dying. "Explain this to me again," she demanded, her silver skin flickering with barely controlled anger. The Velori technician trembled before her. "The gate uses a quantum folding mechanism that we do not fully understand. The humans developed it 200 years ago. They trained some of our people to perform basic maintenance, but the core systems require specialized knowledge that was never shared with us." Never shared? Or never asked for? The technician had no answer. The truth was simple and painful. The Velori had never bothered to learn how the gate worked. Why would they? The humans were always there to handle such things. Technical work was beneath the dignity of an elder race. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. The Krix Collective discovered that their entire medical infrastructure depended on compounds manufactured in human laboratories. They had the formulas, but not the equipment or expertise to produce the medicines themselves. Their scientists worked frantically to reverse engineer the processes. But people were already dying. The Harmonics, whose culture revolved around perfect communication, watched helplessly as their translation networks degraded. Their crystalline minds could process 1,000 languages simultaneously, but they could not understand the programming code that made the system work. That code had been written by human linguists who had spent decades learning to bridge the gap between alien minds. On the frontier world of Axis 7, Governor Tessith faced a crisis that grew worse by the day. Her colony had been a showcase of interspecies cooperation, a place where Valori administrators and Krix merchants and a dozen other species lived and worked together. At the center of it all had been a small community of human engineers and technicians who kept everything running. Now they were gone, and everything was breaking down. The atmospheric processes failed first. Axis 7 was a harsh world with thin air, and without the processors, the oxygen levels in the outer districts began to drop. Then, the water recyclers started producing a strange metallic taste that made people sick. Then the power grid began experiencing random blackouts that left thousands in darkness. Tessa sent message after message to Earth, begging for help. Her messages were received and acknowledged, but no help came. The humans were polite in their refusals. They expressed sympathy for her situation. They suggested that she contact the Galactic Council for assistance. The Council had no assistance to offer. They were dealing with their own emergencies, their own failing systems, their own angry populations demanding answers. Commander Laura Mitchell watched the chaos unfold from the bridge of the Earth vessel Resolute. Her ship patrolled the border of human space, monitoring the distress signals that multiplied every day. Another colony is reporting food shortages, her communications officer reported. The hydroponic systems have failed. They are asking if we can send agricultural specialists. Lavra shook her head. Negative. Our orders are clear. We do not intervene. Kevin Torres, her first officer, stood beside her with a troubled expression. Some of these calls are from civilians, Commander. Families, children. They had nothing to do with the Council's decision. I know, Lavra said quietly. And it hurts. But if we go back now, nothing changes. They will pat us on the head, thank us for our service, and go right back to treating us like servants. Sometimes you have to let people experience the consequences of their choices. She pulled up a map of the galaxy on the main screen. Red dots marked failing systems and emergency broadcasts. There were hundreds of them, and more appeared every hour. The Valori built an empire on conquest, Lavra said. The Krix expanded through trade and intimidation. The Harmonics spread their influence through cultural manipulation. None of them built anything. They took what others created and claimed it as their own. She zoomed in on a small blue dot at the edge of the map. Earth. Humanity built. We solved problems. We created solutions. And they never once stopped to wonder what would happen if we stopped. Now they know. Back on Earth, President Nathan Cole addressed the human assembly with a message that was not broadcast beyond their borders. I want to be clear about our position, he said. We are not punishing the galaxy. We are not seeking revenge. We are simply choosing to focus our energy and resources on our own people for the first time in 300 years. He paused, looking out at the assembled representatives of the human commonwealth. For too long, we gave everything to others and kept nothing for ourselves. Our brightest minds went to serve alien empires. Our strongest workers built alien cities. Our bravest soldiers kept alien peace. And what did we receive in return? Contempt. Dismissal. The message that no matter how much we gave, we would never be good enough. The assembly was silent, but Nathan could feel the agreement in the room. Every person there had a story of sacrifice unrewarded, of kindness repaid with insults. Let them struggle, Nathan continued. Let them understand what it means to build something instead of just taking it. And when they are ready to treat us as equals, truly ready, then we can talk about the future. In the depths of space, the jump gates continued to fail. Trade routes collapsed. Alliances fractured. Species that had nursed ancient grudges found that the human peacekeepers who had kept them apart were no longer there. The first shots of the border war were fired 3 weeks later. It was a small conflict at first, just two minor species fighting over a resource-rich moon. But without human mediators to calm tensions and negotiate settlements, the fighting spread. The galaxy was unraveling, and humanity watched in silence. Some humans felt guilt. Others felt satisfaction. Most simply felt a profound weariness. The exhaustion of a people who had finally stopped carrying a burden that was never theirs to bear. On Axis 7, Governor Tessith stood in her office and watched the lights of the city flicker. Another blackout was coming. Another night of fear and uncertainty. She thought about the human engineers who had lived in the district near the spaceport. They had been quiet people, always working, always fixing things. She had never learned their names. She had never thanked them for keeping her world alive. Now they were gone, and she finally understood how much she had lost.
The Galactic Council Chamber, once a symbol of order and power, had become a place of chaos and blame. Delegates shouted over each other in a dozen languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the anger and accusations flying through the air. High Speaker Thessia of the Valori tried to maintain control, but her authority was crumbling. Her own empire was fracturing, with colony after colony declaring independence or falling into civil war. The proud Valori, who had ruled the stars for 10,000 years, were watching their legacy collapse. "This is your fault," screamed the Krix representative, his mandibles clicking with fury. "Your arrogance drove the humans away. You treated them like servants while they kept our worlds alive." "Our arrogance?" Thessia shot back. "Your people mocked them in every trade negotiation. You cheated them on every contract. Do not pretend your hands are clean." The harmonics pulsed with agitated colors, their crystalline bodies reflecting the chaos around them. Their speaker, a being of pure light named Chorus, tried to project calm. "We must focus on solutions, not blame. The past cannot be changed." "Easy for you to say," growled a delegate from one of the smaller species. "Your worlds are mostly intact. Mine are starving because the agricultural systems the humans installed have failed, and we cannot repair them." Chorus dimmed slightly. Even the harmonics, with all their advanced technology, were struggling. Their famous communication network, the system that had made them the diplomats and messengers of the galaxy, was operating at less than half capacity. Every day, more connections were lost. In a private chamber away from the main assembly, a small group of council leaders met to discuss what everyone was afraid to say publicly. The situation was worse than anyone was admitting, much worse. Councillor Dreth of the Krix Collective spread data tablets across the table. "These are the projections. If current trends continue, we will lose 60% of our jump gate network within 2 years. Trade will collapse. Planets that depend on imported food will face famine. The border war is expanding daily." "We need the humans back," said Governor Tessith, who had traveled from Axis 7 to deliver her report in person. "There is no other solution." High Speaker Thessia's expression hardened. "And how do you propose we accomplish that? They will not even answer our communications." "Then we go to them," Tessith said. "We humble ourselves. We admit our mistakes. We offer them what they asked for in the first place." The room fell silent. The idea of the elder races apologizing to humans, of admitting they had been wrong, was almost unthinkable. For species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia, pride was not just an emotion. It was the foundation of their entire identity. Dreth clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps a private mission, unofficial, someone who can speak to the humans without the weight of formal diplomacy. They chose Dreth himself for the task. He was practical and unsentimental, qualities that the Cricks valued above all others. He traveled alone, in a small ship without markings, and presented himself at the edge of human space. The humans let him wait for 3 days before responding. When he finally received permission to approach Earth, he was met not by a diplomat or a leader, but by a mid-level administrator named Megan Price. She was young by human standards, with brown hair and a polite smile that revealed nothing. "Welcome to Earth," she said, leading him through a busy spaceport where human workers moved with purpose and energy. "How can we help you today?" Dreth was accustomed to elaborate ceremonies and formal protocols. This casual reception felt like an insult, though he suspected that was exactly the point. "I have come to discuss the return of human workers to galactic service," he said. "The Council is prepared to offer significant compensation." Megan nodded, as if he had mentioned something mildly interesting. "I see. Well, our leadership is quite busy at the moment. We are in the middle of a major infrastructure initiative, building new schools, hospitals, research centers. Things we never had time for when we were busy serving the galaxy. Surely your leaders can find time for a matter of such importance." Megan stopped walking and turned to face him. Her smile remained, but her eyes were cold. "Counselor, with respect, your emergency is not our emergency. For 300 years, we begged the Council to take our concerns seriously. We asked for fair treatment, for basic respect. We were told to wait, to be patient, to prove ourselves worthy. Well, now we are busy proving ourselves worthy to ourselves." She handed him a data tablet. "This is a list of private contractors who may be willing to work in galactic space. Their rates are quite high, and they will not accept positions that put them under alien authority. But they are available if you can meet their terms." Dreth looked at the tablet. The numbers were staggering. What humans had once done for modest salaries and living expenses would now cost 100 times as much. "This is extortion," he said. "This is the free market," Megan replied. "Something your people taught us quite well during all those trade negotiations where you cheated us at every turn." Dreth returned to the Council empty-handed. His report was received with anger, then despair, then a grim determination to find another solution. There had to be another way. They could not depend on humanity. They would adapt, evolve, learn to do things themselves. But learning takes time, and time was running out. On Earth, the reconstruction continued. Cities that had been neglected for centuries received new investment. Young humans who would have once sought their fortunes in alien space now stayed home, building careers in their own communities. Scientists who had spent their lives solving alien problems turned their attention to human challenges. President Nathan Cole visited a new research facility where human engineers were developing the next generation of jumpgate technology. It would be faster, more efficient, and completely controlled by humanity. "How long until it is ready?" he asked the lead researcher, a woman named Patricia Dunn. 5 years for the prototype, 10 years for full deployment. And the rest of the galaxy? They can keep using the old gates until they fail completely. Or they can ask nicely for access to the new network. Their choice. Nathan smiled. For the first time in his life, humanity was building for humanity. It felt right. Far away, the border war continued to expand. Species that had been peaceful neighbors for generations turned on each other over resources that were becoming scarce. The Valori Empire sent peacekeeping forces, but without human advisors, their military made mistake after mistake. What should have been a quick intervention became a bloody occupation. The Crix Collective tried to maintain their trade networks, but without human-built infrastructure, their ships were limited to slower-than-light travel. Journeys that once took days now took months. Populations starved. And in the Great Council Chamber, the delegates continued to argue and blame and deny, unable to admit the simple truth that everyone already knew. They needed humanity. They had always needed humanity. They just had never bothered to notice until it was too late.
1 year after humanity withdrew from the galactic stage, the great civilizations of the cosmos stood on the edge of collapse. The Valori Empire had lost a third of its territory. The Crix Collective faced economic ruin. The Harmonics had retreated into isolation. Their communication networks, too, damaged to maintain their traditional role as galactic messengers. And still, the situation grew worse. Admiral Christopher Lane stood on the observation deck of his flagship. The constellation, watching the stars that had once seemed so full of promise. He was 53 years old, a veteran of conflicts across a dozen worlds. And he had never seen anything like the chaos consuming the galaxy. Another distress signal, his communications officer reported. A refugee convoy from the Valori border territories. Their life support is failing. Christopher closed his eyes for a moment. Somewhere out there, people were dying. Not soldiers or politicians, just ordinary beings trying to escape the violence that had engulfed their homes. His orders were clear. Do not intervene. Let the galaxy learn its lesson. But orders could not silence his conscience. Send them the coordinates of the nearest neutral station, he said, and transmit basic repair instructions for their life support systems. Nothing more. It was a small kindness, barely within the boundaries of his orders. It would not save everyone, but it was something. On Earth, President Nathan Cole received a message that changed everything. The Galactic Council, for the first time in its 10,000-year history, had agreed to send a joint delegation to negotiate with humanity. Not individual species pursuing their own interests, but a unified group representing the entire council. Nathan read the message several times, looking for tricks or hidden agendas. He found none. The delegation would include representatives from all major species, traveling together on a single ship, coming to humanity as equals rather than superiors. They are serious, said his advisor, a former diplomat named Helen Carter. I never thought I would see the day. Neither did I, Nathan admitted. The question is whether it is too late. The delegation arrived at the border of human space 2 weeks later. Their ship was impressive, but not threatening, a vessel designed for diplomacy rather than war. Admiral Christopher Lane met them with a small fleet, enough to demonstrate strength without appearing aggressive. Ambassador Desha of the Valori led the delegation. She had aged visibly in the past year, the stress of watching her empire crumble taking its toll. Beside her stood Councilor Dreth of the Crix, Speaker Chorus of the Harmonics, and representatives from a dozen other species. They met on a neutral station, a place built by humans but abandoned during the withdrawal. The lights flickered occasionally, a reminder of what happened when human maintenance crews were no longer available. We have come to make things right, Desha began, a voice carrying a humility that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The Council recognizes that it made terrible mistakes in its treatment of humanity. We offer formal apologies, full membership with voting rights, and substantial reparations for the centuries of service that were never properly acknowledged. She placed a data tablet on the table. It contained the official offer, more generous than anything humanity had ever requested. Christopher Lane reviewed the document carefully. He had been authorized to negotiate on behalf of Earth, a responsibility that weighed heavily on his shoulders. This is impressive, he said finally. A year ago, we would have accepted this offer without hesitation. And now? Dreth asked, his mandibles clicking nervously. Christopher looked around the room at the assembled delegates. These beings had once seemed so powerful, so far above humanity. Now they sat before him with desperate hope in their eyes, waiting for a verdict that would determine the future of their civilizations. "Now I need to understand something," Christopher said. "Why did it take catastrophe to teach you what should have been obvious from the beginning? Humanity asked for nothing unreasonable. We wanted respect, partnership, a voice in decisions that affected our people. We were told no, again and again, while we continued to serve you faithfully." Desha lowered her eyes. Pride. Ancient pride that blinded us to what was right in front of us. We saw humanity as useful tools, not as equals. We were wrong. And if we return? Christopher pressed. What guarantee do we have that things will be different? That in 50 years, or 100, you will not slip back into old patterns? Chorus, the harmonic speaker, pulsed with soft colors. There is no guarantee. Trust must be rebuilt through action, not promises. We can only ask for the chance to prove ourselves. Christopher stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars shone with their eternal light, indifferent to the struggles of the beings that lived among them. "I am going to share something with you," he said. "Something that reflects who humanity really is." He pulled out his own data tablet and transmitted a file to the delegation's devices. They opened it with confusion that slowly turned to amazement. It was a complete technical archive. Instructions for maintaining the jump gates, formulas for synthesizing essential medicines, programming guides for the translation networks. Everything the galaxy needed to survive, organized and annotated in careful detail. "We prepared this 6 months ago," Christopher explained. "Even while we watched your civilization struggle, we were documenting everything we knew. Not to sell it to the highest bidder, not to use it as leverage. We simply believed that knowledge should not be hoarded, even by those who treated us poorly." Desha stared at the data with tears forming in her silver eyes. "You could have let us fail completely. You could have watched us destroy ourselves." "Yes," Christopher agreed. "But that was never who we were. Humanity helps because it is right, not because we expect something in return. That is the part you never understood. Our service was never submission. It was a choice, freely given. And when that choice was met with contempt instead of gratitude, we chose to stop." He returned to his seat and looked directly at the ambassador. "The data I've given you will allow your civilizations to survive. You can rebuild without us if you choose. But if you want humanity to return as partners, as true equals, then things must change fundamentally. Not just treaties and agreements. The way you think about other species. The way you treat those who are different from you." Dreth leaned forward. "What exactly do you want?" "I want you to see us," Christopher said simply. "Not as useful primitives. Not as clever servants. But as people. Fellow travelers in a vast and difficult universe." "Can you do that?" The delegation exchanged glances. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Desha rose to her feet. She walked around the table until she stood before Christopher. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered herself to one knee in the traditional Valori gesture of respect between equals. "I see you," she said. "I see humanity. And I'm sorry it took so long." One by one, the other delegates followed. Dreth lowered his great insectoid head. Chorus dimmed to a single humble glow. Representatives of species that had ruled the stars for millennia knelt before a human admiral and acknowledged what they had denied for 300 years. Christopher felt something shift in his chest. Not triumph or satisfaction. Something warmer and more complex. Something that felt like the beginning of healing. "Then let us talk," he said, "about what comes next." The negotiations lasted 3 months. They were difficult and sometimes painful. Old wounds were opened and examined. Hard truths were spoken. But slowly, carefully, a new framework emerged. Not the old relationship of master and servant. Something new. Something better. On Earth, President Nathan Cole announced the results to the human assembly. "We are not going back," he said. "We are going forward. Not as the galaxy's workers, but as its partners. The road ahead will be long and uncertain. But for the first time in our history among the stars, we walk it as equals." The applause that followed was not triumphant. It was hopeful. And hope, humanity had learned, was the most powerful force in the universe. 3 years had passed since humanity withdrew from the galaxy, and everything had changed. The old Galactic Council chamber, with its towering seats and rigid hierarchy, had been abandoned. In its place stood a new assembly hall built on a station at the crossroads of a dozen trade routes. This hall was different. There were no upper levels reserved for elder races, no lower sections for those deemed less important. Everyone sat together at a great circular table, facing each other as equals. Ambassador Rebecca Stone represented humanity at the first session of the new Galactic Assembly. She was young for such an important position, only 42 years old. But she had earned her place through years of difficult negotiations and honest diplomacy. "The human commonwealth accepts this invitation," she announced, her voice clear and steady. "Not as a return to what was, but as a step toward what can be." Beside her sat delegates from across the galaxy. Some represented the old powers, the Valori remnant, the reformed Crix Assembly, the Harmonic Union. Others came from smaller species that had gained new influence in the reshaping of galactic society. All of them had learned hard lessons about cooperation and respect. High Speaker Desha rose to respond. She looked different now. The arrogance that had once defined her was gone, replaced by something quieter and wiser. The collapse of the old Valori Empire had cost her people greatly, but it had also forced them to rediscover values they had forgotten long ago. "We do not ask humanity to save us again," Desha said. "We ask only for the chance to build something together. As partners, as equals, as friends." The word hung in the air, friends. It was not a word that had ever been used between humans and aliens in all the centuries of their shared history. It felt strange and new and full of possibility. Rebecca smiled. "Then let us begin." Far from the assembly hall, on a remote jump gate at the edge of explored space, a mixed crew worked to bring an ancient piece of infrastructure back to life. The gate had been dark for 2 years, cutting off an entire sector from the rest of the galaxy. Engineer Patrick Moore supervised the repair team, a diverse group that included humans, Valori, Crix, and several species he had never worked with before. It was strange at first, giving orders to beings who had once considered themselves his superiors. But the strangeness faded quickly as they focused on the work. "Check the power coupling on Section 7, Patrick called out. "The readings are unstable." A young Valori technician named Seren hurried to comply. She was barely out of training, part of the first generation of her people to learn technical skills that had previously been left to humans. Her hands were clumsy, but eager as she examined the equipment. "I see the problem," she reported. "The calibration is off by 0.3%. Should I adjust it?" "Show me what you would do," Patrick said, walking over to join her. He had learned that teaching was more valuable than doing. The galaxy needed to develop its own expertise, not depend on humanity forever. Saren made the adjustment carefully, following the procedures Patrick had taught her. When she finished, the power readings stabilized perfectly. "Good work," Patrick said, and he meant it. "You are learning fast." Saren's silver skin flushed with pride. For her people, praise from an expert was a precious gift. The old Valori would never have accepted such a gift from a human. But Saren was not old Valori. She was something new. "Why do you help us now?" she asked as they walked back to the main control room. After everything that happened, after the way your people were treated. Patrick thought about the question. He had asked himself the same thing many times over the past few years. Because holding grudges does not build anything, he said finally. And there is a whole universe out there that needs building. The jump gate powered up with a deep hum that shook the station. Lights flickered to life across its massive frame. After 2 years of darkness, the path between stars was open again. Soren watched with wonder as the first ship passed through, carrying supplies to colonies that had been isolated and struggling. She understood now what the humans had always known. There was joy in service, dignity in work, honor in helping others. These were not signs of weakness or inferiority. They were the foundations of true civilization on Earth. Former President Nathan Cole had retired to a small house on the coast of what had once been called California. He spent his days reading, gardening, and watching the ships rise from the nearby spaceport. His granddaughter, Amanda, visited often. She was 17 now, full of energy and dreams about the future. She planned to join the new Galactic Exploration Course, a joint human-alien organization that was mapping unknown regions of space. Do you ever regret it? She asked one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. Walking away from the galaxy like that? Nathan considered the question carefully. He thought about all the suffering that had followed the withdrawal. The wars, the famines, the collapsed civilizations. He thought about the people who had died because humanity chose not to help. I regret the pain, he said. Every life lost weighs on my conscience. But I do not regret the choice. Sometimes you have to be willing to walk away for people to understand what they are losing. And you have to be willing to come back for anything to get better. Amanda nodded slowly. She had studied the history of those years in school. She understood the reasons for the withdrawal, even if she could not fully imagine what it had been like to live through it. The galaxy is different now, she said. My teachers say it is because of what your generation did. Nathan smiled. The galaxy is different because everyone decided to make it different. Humans and aliens together. We planted the seeds, but the growth belongs to all of you. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, a ship rose into the darkening sky, carrying passengers to worlds that had once seemed impossibly far away. Amanda watched it climb until it was just a point of light among the stars. I want to see it all, she said. Every world, every species. I want to understand how big the universe really is. Nathan put his arm around her shoulders. Then go. Explore, learn, and remember that wherever you travel, you carry humanity with you. Our history, our struggles, our hopes. Share them freely and listen to what others have to share in return. That is how understanding grows. Amanda hugged him tightly. I will make you proud. You already have, Nathan said. In the assembly hall. The first session of the new Galactic Assembly was coming to a close. Agreements had been reached, partnerships formed, old wounds acknowledged and forgiven. There was still much work to do, centuries of mistrust to overcome, but the foundation had been laid. Ambassador Rebecca Stone walked out of the hall feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight of history still pressed on her shoulders, but it was no longer a burden. It was a reminder of how far they had come. High Speaker Desha fell into step beside her. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Two women from different worlds who had found common ground. What happens now? Desha asked. Rebecca looked out at the stars visible through the station's transparent walls. Somewhere out there, ships carried goods and people between worlds that were learning to work together. Somewhere out there, young people of every species were dreaming of futures that would have been impossible just a few years ago. Now we build, Rebecca said. Together. Desha nodded. Together, she repeated, as if testing the word. It felt right that the story of humanity's withdrawal would be told for generations to come. It would be studied in schools and debated by philosophers. Some would call it a cruel lesson. Others would call it a necessary one. But everyone would agree on one thing: in silence, humanity had withdrawn. In wisdom, they had returned. And the galaxy had been forever changed, not because humanity was special or superior, but because they had shown, through action and sacrifice, what true partnership meant. They had demonstrated that respect must be earned and given freely, that service without dignity is slavery, and that the measure of civilization is not power or technology, but how it treats those it does not need to treat well. The stars shone on, as they always had, but the beings who lived among them were different now. They had learned to see each other clearly, to value each other honestly, to build together what none could build alone, and that made all the difference.